This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Thrilled this week to be the #1 podcast in the country under Apple Business News. Thank you to a great deal of our listeners and our guests. Thank you very much. Today we're joined by a regular guest, a brilliant engineer turned leader turned consultant. We're joined by Liz Hutson. And Liz embodies the concept we're going to talk about today, which is a lifetime of learning or never stop learning, however you want to talk about it, or continuous learning. Liz, let me ask you to tee it up. Can you take a moment to introduce yourself? Then we jump right into the subject of continuous learning and constantly trying to get better as a core lifetime pursuit. Liz?
Absolutely. Great to talk with you, Scott. My name is Liz Hutson. I am the founder and the principal consultant of EGH, LLC. And we are a healthcare products and services consulting firm, which is primarily focused in the private equity space. And yeah, this is one that's near and dear to my heart, continuous learning. I think I'm a learner by nature, but I will say it's an active part of my process, I would say, because I think it's so much easier to stay complacent. I think it's easier, it's more comfortable. It doesn't take, it takes time, right, to have this active mindset of learning and growing, and it takes a lot of effort. So it would be much easier to stay complacent, but I think it's so important, especially as a leader, but I think as a human being in general, to keep learning.
And let's talk about that, because quite frankly, as a leader, as a professional, as whatever it is, there's constantly incremental creativity benefits from constant learning. There's all kinds of benefits from constant learning. But talk about what you just said. Why is it so important as a human being to keep on learning? Talk about that, because that transcends everything. And I also think it's correct. But tell us a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we're talking here in the context of business, but it's so much more universal than that. As a human being, as a mother, as a person in the community, as just a human being that wants to interact with others, I think it's really important for so many reasons. When I think about growth, if we're not constantly learning, we're not going to grow. I think without pushing ourselves to learn, and when I say learn, I'm talking about books, podcasts, conferences, talking to people, tapping into best demonstrated practices, all those different vehicles to learn those things. I think we start to just stay in our comfort zones. This is what we've always known. It's very comfortable. This is how we'll always be, but we never grow if we do that. So I think that's the first part. But it's just right in line with that. I think in the world of healthcare, in the world of just in corporate America as general, innovation, in order for us to innovate, and our world and our environment are constantly changing, we just have to stay on top of the latest trends, stay on top of the latest customer insights, employee needs, our work trends. The environment is changing, technology is changing, golly, at like just a rapid pace. And so in order to stay relevant, I think, both that growth and that innovative mindset comes from staying up on the latest and greatest from a learning perspective. I would further say that the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. And I think it's a really good and appropriate grounding in reality that teaches us to stay both humble and curious, right? I think it's a really good place for us to be, to go, wow, I did not know that. That's a healthy grounding, or a healthy humility that comes to us when we start to keep on learning like that.
And let me ask you a question. People too, as an adult, all kinds of different learning. They can either do a structured certificate program, they could do go back and do an advanced degree or an executive degree, or they could just make it a daily habit. Yeah. And talk about how you go about it, and any thoughts on that. Because sometimes you try and make it a daily habit, some of us are good at it, some of us are bad at it.
Yeah.
If you do it through a more structured program, you're sort of forced to do it. But talk about the ways in which you sort of make sure that you're continually learning.
Yeah, that's right. What you said, I think, is exactly right. I think sometimes we find it to be a daunting task, right? We say, well, the only way to learn is for me to go back out and get my MBA or higher degree. Those are great. I mean, those are great opportunities for learning, but I don't want us to go, well, that's the only way to learn. That's certainly one way to learn, but there's the daily practice of learning that we need to build into it. And to, some of the things that you said, whether it's just reading up on the latest and greatest online with books, going to conferences, like all those different ways are good things to happen. But oftentimes I hear from people, Liz, man, you're reading a lot of things. You're going to all these conferences. How do you make time for that? And I think the thing that I do, and I think it's the first and most important thing, is to make it a priority, right? As soon as I name that, why it's important to me and why I have a specific goal around this, I think it becomes something that's not I've got to do this also, right? But it's something that I do. It's something that's part of my growth and my self-development. So in that way, then, when you have that mindset, and I'm talking about growth here, continuous learning, you could throw in there, like, how do you find time for physical fitness, right? Or how do you find time to cook your food versus take out every day, right? As soon as you name these things as important to you, you make the time for them. So I think that's the first thing that we want to do, is to go, if this is important, you make the time for it. But I think there's some really easy ways to sneak this into your day without it feeling like this overwhelming thing of, like, I need to sit down in a fancy chair with my reading attire on, and I've got to sit down with a big book. It doesn't have to be that, right? If you're going for a walk, if you're going, or working out, and you put a podcast in, or you're listening to a book, an audio book, that's an easy way to do that. When you're driving, like from here to the airport, or driving to work, or driving to your client site, put an audio book in and put a podcast in. Or another great way to be learning is networking, right? Like talking to great people, tapping into those best demonstrated practices is such a good way to keep on top of things. So making those car trips, sitting in traffic, those are ways to learn. I think oftentimes we'll be sitting around and we're bored and we grab our phones and we start to scroll through social media. I would challenge ourselves to go, instead of reaching for social media, maybe we keep a book nearby, have a book in your bag, your purse all the time. So when you're waiting in line, or when when you feel bored, instead of mindlessly going through, the latest cooking techniques on something, there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. But maybe that's a way to sneak that in. And I do think that that's something that, as we model for our teams, for the people that are looking up to us, the people that we're mentoring, to our kids, to our friends, I think this is a really great practice, that they're watching you as a leader prioritize that. And I find that my team, for example, every year when we are at the holiday season, they get my favorite book for the year, and it's something that we talk about together, and it's an important part of our culture, that continuous learning.
I think the point that you made is that at some point you've got to make a commitment to the continuous learning, to the self-improvement. You've got to mentally make that commitment, and then you have to figure out ways in which you're going to do it in some kind of structured way. It could be just listening to a podcast, but it's a plan to do so, take some notes, whatever it might be, so that it doesn't just sort of go in one ear and out the other. But I do think this concept of starting with, if you want to do this, you've got to sort of make a commitment towards it. I think that's a wonderful perspective on it. I think it's so true. I think that is right on. Liz, anything else you want to share? When you look at, the continuous learning that I do, I would say goes in peaks and valleys over the years. Some years I'm very at it, some years I'm not. Tell us a little bit about your continuous learning and so forth, and how that, how you digest it, or how that goes.
Yeah. I think my journey has been the same as yours, Scott. There are times that I feel like it, and I'm reading lots and lots of things. I'm talking to a lot of people, and then other times that I just feel like I don't want to do it. I just don't feel like it. And I think you and I talk about this a lot. At the beginning of the year and various points through the year, I set a meeting with myself. I have some goal setting time for the year, and I check in with myself throughout the year through, at various points, maybe at quarterly points, certainly at monthly points, and even daily. How am I doing against those goals? So at the top of the year, oftentimes what I do is I will actually put my reading list together. I'll put my learning list together, and I have it actually taped up on my wall right next to my desk by my computer. And it's a daily, hourly reminder of what my goals are, and some really specific tangibles around, these are the books that I want to get through. These are the people that I want to talk to. These are the things that I want to accomplish this year. And so then, and I take great satisfaction in crossing things off a list. I'm definitely a list person, a checklist person. So it feels good when I can walk through that. And then importantly, I think what is really enjoyable to this, and it's another added benefit, I think, of continuous learning, is as you learn those things, as you learn something new, your mind's been challenged, your thinking has been challenged. It's something interesting that is good for you, but it's also great for conversation too. So as you're talking to somebody new, you go, hey, I just learned this new concept, would love your feedback on it. What do you think about this? And it's a great growth opportunity for both of you, and yet another point of engagement, right? So I think that's a good way of, like, when you feel in a little bit of a funk and you don't feel like doing it, one, just forcing yourself to do it because it's a priority, but two, turning it into a connection point, turning it in a teachable moment, an engaging kind of a moment, I think takes it to another level.
No, I think that's a great perspective. And I just love that. I love the concept of continuous learning. The discipline it takes is another thing, but turning it into connections. How do you connect the dots? How do you put those things together? I think it's so healthy. Liz, as always, I want to thank you for joining us on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. You're a wonderful guest, one of our most listened to guests, and what a remarkable career you are having, I should say, not had, having. Magnificent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Scott. So great to talk to you.